It seems like the number one complaint I hear about Traktor stems is that it cannot be used with an S3 or S2 controller. And apparently you can do that, you just need to know where to look. So, today I will tell you how to MIDI map F1 controller to use with Traktor stems. Obviously, F1 has default mapping to control stems, but it is limited to just one deck at a time. So I found it handy to modify this behavior. This MIDI mapping approach can be applied to any other controller, be it Traktor, Pioneer, or any other brand. I will try to get a hand on a few of them and make separate videos about MIDI mapping for each one. Let me show you what we are going to achieve today. As you might have seen in my latest Deep House video, the two middle columns will serve as our on and off switches for each of the stems, your drums, bass, melody, and vocals. And if you hold Shift, the columns will turn orange, meaning they are now responsible for turning on and off your FX sends for deck A and B, respectively. First things first, let's disable default mapping that F1 comes with out of the box. To do this, let's go into Settings and Controller Manager and find your Traktor Control F1 default. In this field which says Import, just select None, and now the controller doesn't do anything. Now let's go on and add a new mapping for Traktor F1 by clicking Add, Traktor, selecting F1, and User. In the Import section, select F1. What we just did is essentially turned off any default mappings for Traktor F1 so that it doesn't behave as usual, and turned it into the custom MIDI controller. Though it's not really MIDI controller right now because we are utilizing the built-in mapping functionalities for this particular controller, but the logic is kind of similar. Traktor mapping can be divided into two parts, one for your inputs and one for your outputs. Inputs are those things that when you click something, it is reflected within the software. MIDI output, though, is used to turn on and off your LEDs within the controller, as well as change some colors. We'll start off by just doing inputs. To do that, click Add In, go into Deck Common, Submix, and there Slot Mute On. Slot Mute On turns particular stem from the stems deck on or off. You cannot see it in software, but you'll be able to hear it right now. Just give me a second and we'll finish this mapping. To actually map something to the function that you have just selected, click Learn and click a button on the controller. Right now I'll be mapping my deck A to this row of buttons, therefore I will click the top pad in this column. You can see that the value of pad.2 was populated into this field. Now you can click Learn again so that the learning mode is finished, and just as an example, let's expand it, and these are all your different pads, encoders, faders that F1 might have. Therefore, it becomes quite easier to map Traktor specific controllers to Traktor software. Now that we have it done, let's go through the other values we can select here. Modifiers is something that we'll cover a bit later. Type of controller is usually pre-populated for you based on the button that you clicked. Interaction mode, though, is a bit more interesting. Traktor has three different interaction modes: toggle, hold, and direct. Toggle is like your on and off switch. It's either on or off. Hold, though, is a bit different. It is only on when you hold the button. As for direct, it's usually used for different kind of functions where you can select a particular value for the effect, for example, but in this case, since we are just operating with on and off values, it's not of a particular use. I'm going to select toggle and proceed to the last important thing in this page, which is assignment. Assignment is where you select which deck and which stem are you going to affect. For example, if I select deck A slot 1, I'm going to affect drums in this case, because my drums are in slot 1. That's pretty much it for now that you want to do here. Now close this window, let's press the button that we just mapped. As you can hear, the drums are being enabled and disabled by this button. So right now we have an issue. We don't know if this button is actually on or off right now. Let's go and fix this. Go into Settings again, into your Controller Manager, and let's add the MIDI output. Click Add Out, and right away you can see that Traktor suggests the latest input that you selected to map to the output as well. So that's what I'm going to do. Click Slot Mute On. Now if you're going to click Learn and click the pad, it's not going to work, because Traktor doesn't know which color you want to set it to. As you can see in our MIDI input mapping, it is mapped to the pad number 2. Therefore, let's click on the MIDI output, proceed to the drop-down menu, find in a list our pads, pad number 2, and for example set it to violet. Right away you can see that the pad turned violet. Now when we click it, you can see that the pad reflects the on and off state of this particular function. To double check everything, let's go through the rest of the properties. Modifiers will be skipped for now, type of control is pre-selected for you, interaction mode is output by default as well, and for the assignment it's deck A, slot 1. Let's check if everything works as expected. You can see that the pad is inverted, meaning that when stem is on, the pad is for some reason off, and vice versa. Let's fix it. I'm going into my controller manager, and in the MIDI output at the very bottom section of the properties, I click Invert. Let's close this window and check. Now everything works as expected. Let's map the melody, for example. To make the process a bit faster, you can duplicate already existing MIDI mappings. To do this, select the mapping that you want to duplicate and click Duplicate. You can see that Traktor duplicated the command, and now we can learn the command. Click Learn and click the pad. I learned the pad for melody. Now click Learn again to disable the learning and proceed to changing the actual slot which is affected. Click Assignment, deck A, slot 3, so that we are affecting melody. Right away I will add MIDI output to LED as well. Click Add Out, click Slot Mute On, find the pad that you have just mapped. By looking here I can see that it is pad number 10, so I'm going into my output mapping, finding my pad number 10 and setting it to violet. I'm going to invert the values the same way we did previously. And that's pretty much it. Let's check it. As you can hear, it's working just fine. Let's do the drums for deck B. I will duplicate my command, click Learn and click this pad over here, go into Assignment, select deck B and slot 1. Right away I'm adding my MIDI output, clicking Slot Mute On, inverting the value, finding which pad I have just mapped, it's pad number 3, coming back to my Slot Mute On, selecting pad 3 from the drop-down menu, and clicking Violet. You can see the pad is reflecting what is within the software. By using this approach, you can MIDI-map the other buttons, and now we are going to proceed to our FX sense per deck. As I've shown you, we are going to use Shift to change the colors and the functions of those buttons. Though right now, Shift doesn't do anything. To fix this, we need to create so-called modifier, so the Traktor knows that we want to track the state of this Shift button when we do our mapping. Doing this is quite simple, just click Add In, find Modifier, and let's create modifier number 1. Number doesn't matter, it's just arbitrary for you to understand which modifiers you create. As you can see, modifier assignment is global, meaning it is available globally within your mapping. I'm going to click Learn and click Shift. There are a few settings you need to change here. Type of controller is button, though interaction mode shall be changed to hold, meaning when we hold the button, it is doing something, and when we release it, it doesn't. Traktor thinks of modifiers as something that holds value, and you can actually see the modifier state at the very top, 1 through 8, which reflect the modifiers you can create over here. So what we actually want to do is when we hold Shift, we want the modifier to obtain the value of 1, which is different from 0. To do that, just set the value to 1 over here. And now when we hold Shift, look over here and you can see that when we hold Shift, the value changes to 1, and when we release it, it turns to 0 back, right as we wanted. Now let's go and create Stem's FX Sense on and off button. To do that, click Add In, Deck Common, Submix, and click Slot FX On. I'm going to click Learn and click this top pad over here. Now we come to important section, which is modifier conditions. When you click modifier, you can see there are some conditions which Traktor has built in that you can rely on. Though we are going to use a custom modifier for shift button that we have just created. Click M1 from the dropdown, meaning selecting modifier number 1. Since we want stem's FX controls to be only available when we hold shift, let's change the modifier conditions to 1. This way, the button will only work when shift is pressed. I'm also going to change the interaction mode to toggle the same way as we did for stems on and off. As for deck assignment, since we are doing it for our drums, let's select deck A, slot 1. Let's check what we've got. I'm now going to hold shift and check if our stems effects truly work. And as you can see, it does. But unfortunately, you can also see that the pad changes color. And as you can remember, the pad color of violet actually reflects our on and off state of the stem itself. Let's go into settings and fix it for our stems on and off buttons. To do that, we need to tell Traktor that if shift is not pressed, all those previous modifications that we did to our on and off switches shall be available. But if we hold shift, disregard everything that relates to our on and off and just do the things that are related to stem's FX sense on and off. Fixing it is easy by going into each one of our slot mute on functions and adding modifiers into them. Our modifier 1 shall be set to 0, meaning that we are not holding shift. Proceed by doing the same for other ones. Let's check what we've got. Now when we hold shift and press this pad, it doesn't change the color, meaning that stem is not enabled or disabled. However, as you can see in the software, the stem's FX scent is enabled or disabled. One last thing that we need to fix is actually applying color to our stem's FX scent. Click Add Out, click Slot FX On, check which pad you assigned to our slot FX On previously, which is pad number 2, find pad number 2, and let's make it light orange. Now let's hold shift and see if everything works. As you can see, pad color reflects what we see in software. In this case, we don't need to press invert button in the mapping since everything works as expected. Let's see what happens next time we connect our F1. I'm going to plug it out and plug it in. As you can see, the pads reflect exactly what we wanted. And if you press shift, the stem's effects pads are also working properly. I went a bit further and also MIDI-mapped my faders at the top to actually reflect my volumes in Traktor software, and those encoders at the top to reflect my mixer effects. You can see how I use them in my latest video with deep house mixing. One convenient tip that I'm going to give you right now is when you go into your controller manager, you can see a mapping over here. What we can do is actually click Edit and Edit Comment. I'm going to type in stem FX sense and on and off. It doesn't affect anything, it's just for you to remember what this mapping is all about. Click OK. Now in the list of mappings, you can see the mapping and understand from the description what it actually does. If you want to experiment with adding different mappings or just breaking down mapping into 2 parts so that you can disable and enable different parts at different times, you can actually do that. And for example, as I did here, I MIDI-mapped my top section to be my mixer section, so that my faders represent my volumes for different deck, and my top encoders represent my filters. Therefore, for example, I created my mixer for NB, which you can see is for Traktor Control F1. So if right now, for example, I disable my import, it's not going to affect anything. Let me close this window, and you can see that the faders do not affect anything for my faders. But if I go back and for my mixer mapping, enable my Traktor Control F1 as an import, when I close this window, I can see that the faders indeed work, as well as my mixer. That's it. You can always extend this mapping with your custom things, be it headphones volume, your cue mix, or cue volume, so that the setup is right just for you. I am still figuring out what's my best setup, so who knows, maybe in the future I will share some things and tricks with you to know. That's been it. Check out the description below to know how to create the highest quality stems from any track in your collection, and I will see you in the next one. By the way, you'll be able to download this mapping in the description.